Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Dreaming Forward podcast. I'm your host, Kalyn Wilson, and today we're going to be continuing our conversation around workforce planning, but we're going to change gears just slightly to talk about succession planning. Succession planning is the process of choosing the next in line, hence the title. Who Got Next is the story of succession planning. Succession planning is an integral part of workforce planning because as you're planning your workforce, you do have to think about how people will move through the organization, not only thinking about putting people into a position to stay. Succession planning means that you are beginning the steps to invest in talent's development or at the very least supporting talent as they develop themselves. Hopefully, it's a mix of both, but we'll get to that in a second. And finally, succession planning should set you up to have all of the gaps filled in case of resignations, terminations, or talent movement. It is one of the number one ways that you can support quality retention efforts because it lets people know what's next for them so they don't have to guess. If you think about succession planning, it involves a number of steps, but just to lay out the process at a high level, the first step is to identify what are all of your levels. Sounds simple, but a lot of leaders, especially in smaller departments, they don't always know. And those levels don't always translate the same across the organization. You may have different leveling systems for engineering than you do for finance, or you may have different leveling systems for HR than you do for marketing. And you have to be honest with yourself about how that shapes up, especially for people who may want to move and shift functional areas. With that being said, those levels are going to determine what next looks like. And there are two things to consider here. One, can people skip levels or are they required to go in sequence? And what is the pivot point between being an individual contributor, a people manager, and executive level? Those shifts make a huge difference. Let's start with thinking about skip jumps versus sequential. Skip jumps can be excellent ways to course correct for unfair or biased promotional practices. A lot of companies struggle with this. Maybe you find that a lot of your BIPOC talent is concentrated in the lower ranks of your company, but people are completely qualified for higher level positions. And you may make the decision to say, yes, by policy, someone could skip no more than 2 or 3 levels instead of having to go level by level. And that may help you to quickly scale internal talent into executive and leadership ranks. If you go the sequential route, that could be more beneficial if you know that you have rather detailed development programs that are designed to have certain milestones, build certain skills and competencies as talent moves up. If you don't have something that detailed or that, I would say, thorough, maybe might be a good word for that, you may want to consider the skip level policy because people are probably going to have to invest in themselves. And so you want to be able to reward them if they're taking that initiative. The skip level or the sequential could backfire because again, different people in different functional areas are going to move at different times. So you may have some folks, especially I find in departments where there are very clear outcomes. For example, some of maybe at least half, maybe even most of the work you do in HR at times does not necessarily have a clear outcome. It can be deeply operational or tactical work that's just cyclical. Benefits comes to mind. Did everybody's benefits get processed? Yes, they probably only were processed in the fall, unless it was some life event that happened. And so it can be a slower process to move there versus if you are in product or engineering, you launch a new product, you work on a new feature that's coming out. That may happen every month or every couple weeks or every couple months. And so those people may have a faster timeline to move in a faster growth process. You want to make sure that you even that out or at least have it in writing to justify why they may happen. And this is where you may consider having levels. So levels 1, 2, 3, etc., but also steps within the level. So maybe you have level 1, but within 1, there are steps A, B, and C. So you could be a 1A, 1B, 1C, and then go to 2A, etc. And it just keeps going. That way, again, you can kind of slow that pace so that it evens out across the company. You also want to consider those pivot points between being an individual contributor, a people manager, and an executive. Because when you're thinking about succession planning, those three levels require very different skill sets. They require different levels of strategic versus operational thinking, and they require different levels of competency related to those soft skills like political acumen, discernment, tact, diplomacy, etc. You want to be very careful because the higher you go in that ranking system, the more you are dependent upon organizational specific culture norms. As an example, in my career, I've worked at places where it was very common that when you send an email, you get straight to the point. You don't even need to have a greeting necessarily because it moved quick and it was very much time sensitive. So we don't have time for all the fluff stuff. I've had other careers where you don't put stuff in email the first time. You call someone to have a conversation, and then you put an email just to make sure that we're all on the same page and writing in case somebody needs to reference back to check and make sure they didn't miss a step. To put something in writing first felt like an attack. Like, oh, are you trying to do something? You're trying to get me caught up. And again, the stakes are higher when you get into people management, when you get into executive leadership. So you have to invest in talents, knowledge, acumen, and savvy with navigating through all of those norms, the higher they go. If an individual contributor at a lower title level flubs it up and offends somebody, okay, we're irritated, not so much. A VP, an SVP, someone in the chief spot does it, now it's a big deal. So again, you have to kind of course correct for that and be ready to make those investments early. Another thing to consider with succession planning is who is going to be next up again at every level and across every function. I think sometimes it happens in departments that are considered high risk, but this is something that should be happening across the entire company because you might be able to cross pollinate talent. So somebody may be working in one functional area, but they have a passion for something else. And you want to be able to have that fishbowl level view to see everything so that you don't pigeonhole someone into something that's not a fit for them. And then it becomes a retention issue because they leave the company. With that being said, succession planning is your way to show people how much they mean to you. There is great pride in being identified as a leader, especially when it's based on skills that we love about ourselves. So if I become the next in line for a particular department or a particular leader who I really respect or whose work I think is amazing and I would love to follow in their footsteps, I want to stick around because now I want to see, well, what y'all gonna do? You do want to be careful though with succession planning that it's not a fruitless effort. What I mean by that, I mean a fruitless effort on the successor's side. Because if you pick me as a successor, and I think we all know that that person isn't moving for 5 to 7 years, what's the likelihood that I'm going to wait around there? But if I know, hey, this person could retire in 2 years, I might stick around for that. Another element to think about is how to keep people warm while they wait to succeed someone. So if you know that they have certain competencies that they lack, help them develop those, reward them for developing them, recognize them for developing it while they wait to become the successor for a particular role. Also, don't allow your people managers to keep people chained to a particular role. So, for example, if I am a director and I'm looking to be the successor to a VP, and so it's clear I've been identified, everybody knows it, but I happen to see this other senior director role in another department. And so I like that. As HR professionals and senior most leaders, it's important that you be ready to step in if necessary to say, no, we can let this person go work on this project. Or maybe they could do both. Again, you want to look for different options, because if not, that does become a retention issue. Succession planning becomes important starting at the selection process. So when people are coming into an organization, yes, you're interviewing them for the role that they have, but you should also be able to think and project, in 2 years, this person might be a really good fit for this. Let's see this on their resume, or they mention that they're interested in this thing. You can begin having those conversations very early. And if you don't feel comfortable, it could be for legal reasons or just it's not the culture in the company to talk about it in the selection process, you can have that conversation during onboarding and then begin the process of keeping that person warm, making sure that they're ready, recognizing them for the contributions that they make, especially related to the role that they could be going toward. That helps to keep people around and keep people motivated to do more and to really invest back in the company, because they know that the company is already looking to invest in them. The last point that I'll make about succession planning is that everyone needs a successor. And if you find that succession planning intimidates you, or you feel like you got to keep a tight grip and I'm not looking for somebody else because this is my role, you got to check yourself. Because what that probably means is that you have begun or have already stagnated in your own career, or no one has put together a succession plan for you. So if you don't know where you're going next, anybody who comes along will be seen as a threat. Or if you are looking to narrow at your career, you won't be looking to invest in anybody else, because they could end up trying to take your spot if they learn to do blah, blah, blah easily. I've had that happen a couple times to me. I'm almost struggling to even think of an example to give, but what I'll say is this. It is your responsibility to know what your own gaps are in your job profile. If there are things you want to do and you know it's a gap, you have a responsibility to have a conversation with your manager to build that. And it should not involve you stepping on other people to make sure that they can't grow at the expense of your own stagnation or incompetence. So if you don't know how to do something and somebody else does and they could end up leapfrogging over you, hey, too bad, so sad. Your next thing will come along. But it's not fair, and it reflects poorly on your leadership skills and your ego, to be quite honest, and your ability to manage your ego, that you would suppress someone else's growth because it could potentially outshine yours. Actually, I do have a good example of this, and I want to tell it in a way. No, let me just tell it. Let me just tell it. So y'all know I worked in civil service in a couple of different places, and there was one place in particular that was deeply reliant on civil service exams. The way the exams work, they were citywide exams, and so anybody could end up scoring a particular score and end up being, was it placed or ranked? I can't remember what the exact term was for that. But when they called off of what they called the list, meaning these are the scores and the numbers where people ranked based on their scores, it could be anybody from across the city. And if you got picked, if your number was called, they would call you for a particular position, but you could opt to just keep your same job and just adopt the title, the civil service title in your current job, and not move. And they would just go to the next person on the list. Well, there was a particular exam that paid quite a lot of money. I think it was one of the highest paying exams in the entire system. And there was a person that the managers, senior most managers, did not like, but everybody else liked this person. And they scored very high on the list. Let's say they were 2, 3, they were no lower than 5, I want to say. And they scored higher than the highest ranking person in the whole department. Again, it's a citywide test. So this could have just meant that they scored 89 and this other person scored 87. I don't know what the differential was, but the point was they scored higher. So by right, they should have been called off the list. But to get called off the list and have the option to keep this title would have meant that they would have had to get a raise. It would have meant that they would have had to become even safer in their role. And they did not want that because they were always gunning for this person, looking for a way to get rid of them. I left before I could see the full outcome. I ended up seeing the person later and asked, like, what the heck? Like, did they end up calling this person off the list? They said, yeah, finally they just gave him the title and they're about to retire. But That's an example of the dark side of succession planning. You don't hold people back just because you don't like them. And if that's the way that you use power, you got a lot of work to do, my friend. Power should be used responsibly. Power says, if I know that you're not ready for something, I'm either going to help you get ready or create a space where you can tell me that readiness is not something that you desire, and we'll determine next steps from there. But it is not me leveraging my power to push you down. Because then not only does that set off pretty ugly karmic cycle, I'm not going to get into that, but it also puts you in a position where you are now experiencing what I would consider a dereliction of duty as a manager. Because your job is to make sure that people can maximize their potential and performance. So if you're purposely suppressing their potential and their performance, you're not doing your job now. So think on that. I'm gonna leave that one alone. I'm not gonna touch on that too much longer. But what I will say is succession planning is very weighty work. It is not easy at all. I would encourage you to not do it in a bubble. So check your succession plans with other people, get together with folks, understand what their mindset is. They could give you some aha moments that you need as a leader to do succession planning much better. I would encourage you to have some type of standard measurement system because, again, that cross pollination and cross functional movement will happen. And you don't want people to have a skill set that is so specific to your group that it renders them obsolete in any other part of the company. That's a dangerous place to be. So get together with other people, check it over, and do it frequently. This should be at least an annual process. But if you know you have high turnover in certain departments, it should probably be happening more frequently than that. Tell me, what are your thoughts on succession planning? Do you have a successor? Have you ever thought about it? Is this something that you've ever done? Who helped you do it? Was it HR or something that you just kind of looked up on your own? And most important, what makes you scared about succession planning, if anything? Let me know down below in the comments. I look forward to seeing your thoughts. And as always, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Excited to see you in the next episode. Take care, y'all. Bye-bye.